Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this august and extremely interesting event. There's, I think, a very fascinating morning lined up for you. My name is Jeremy Bowen. I am the chairman of this today. So it's my responsibility to try to introduce some of the speakers, to talk a little bit about what will be happening. And, you know, I think today is very much an issue of there's continuity from what some of you were at yesterday, which was the Global Leaders Summit. I think today and also tomorrow is about some of the challenges in trying to put everything that's being discussed into action. And I was just saying to our first speaker, who's Dr. Ahmed Belhoul, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Masdar, that when I said to some friends and colleagues of mine that I was coming down from London to Abu Dhabi to talk about sustainability, they spluttered a little bit and said, "What, Abu Dhabi? Sustainability? What's all that about?" But I said to them, look, you know, Masdar, they've got a guarantee that the government here is putting in $15 billion to get this going. And since I've come here, I've been extremely impressed by everything that's being done. And I think there are massive lessons here for other people to learn as well. So I think then, without further ado, the man who knows possibly more about it than anybody else, Dr. Ahmed Belhoul, the CEO of Masdar. Please welcome him, and he's going to speak.
Thank you for that great introduction. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the 8th Annual World Future Energy Summit, an event that drives partnerships and investments with a common goal to advance technology. It is our collective efforts that are helping reshape the energy landscape and transition towards a sustainable future. In our unpredictable world, one thing is certain: access to energy is a cornerstone of economic growth, and its demand is rising. We're confronted with meeting the energy demands of new cities rising up in the developing world and consumers adopting the latest technologies. This rising demand is our industry's responsibility as well as its opportunity. We're gathered here today during interesting times. With the price of oil at a 5-year low, some equate this with a reduced appetite for renewables. However, this historic correlation no longer stands true. You see, while hydrocarbons are a precious and an important resource powering our vital industries, it is the rapidly growing demand for electricity that drives the adoption of renewables. In fact, the recent fluctuation in oil prices is one of the reasons why we need to diversify the energy mix. Because when compared to the unpredictability of oil prices, one fact remains predictable: the fuel cost of solar and wind is zero. Unlike any other technology, renewable energy has optimized its performance and has reduced its cost over time. In various parts of the world, renewable energy is outcompeting traditional power. In fact, in some US states, sunshine is cheaper than coal. And even here, in the United Arab Emirates, utility-scale solar is competing with traditional power. These are strong signals, signals of a future with limitless energy, energy that is sustainable because it is renewable. Ladies and gentlemen, we must maintain economic growth while reducing climate risk. We must power our societies while anticipating future demand. And with surging population and finite resources, we must pursue all forms of energy, unconventional, conventional, and alternative. This requires that we rethink the relationship between traditional and new forms of power, and that energy must not only coexist, but also work in harmony. And this means looking for new opportunities and new business models. This region's appetite for renewables has quickly taken shape, with Abu Dhabi taking the first steps almost a decade ago. Steps that at first surprised the world, but steps that are today helping lead a transition towards a sustainable future. Masdar is proud of its global footprint that extends from the deserts of Abu Dhabi to the shores of the United Kingdom. And as our neighbors join us in this race to advance renewable energy, our experience will help reinforce regional efforts. The World Future Energy Summit presents us with the opportunity to share our experiences and to forge partnerships that will help enable this region and the world to diversify the energy mix. Ladies and gentlemen, addressing energy security, climate risk, and sustainable development is a shared responsibility. And that effort is what unites us today. Let us dare to rethink approaches of the past. Let us work together to increase the adoption of renewable energy. And let us take bold actions, actions that meet future challenges, and actions that promote a sustainable future. Thank you.
Well, it's a very interesting kickoff then to the morning's proceedings. And the next item on our agenda is a ministerial panel, rather a stellar lineup of ministers from sub-Saharan Africa to talk about turning infrastructure challenges into economic opportunities, because of course that is, when people see economic opportunities, companies are more interested in investing than in something which is simply seen to be, or when they're told that it's a good. A little bit of background. 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies over the past decade are in sub-Saharan Africa. The old image of Africa south of the Sahara as a place of war and pestilence and famine is just not the case anymore. And I think sometimes in Western Europe, where I come from, people are guilty of seeing things still through these stereotypes, when actually what is there are young countries rising with young, increasingly educated populations who are facing up themselves to the challenges they have for the future. And to chair the panel that's coming up now, this ministerial panel, we have Maria van der Hoeven, who's Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, and so of course knows more than most about the kinds of challenges which lie ahead, and which in some cases are already being solved. So I will turn the podium, the floor, over to Maria, who will take you through the next period. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for your kind introduction. And you know, it's an honor and a privilege for me to moderate this ministerial panel. I've been a minister to the Netherlands of energy and economics for quite some years, so I think I know a few of the challenges that ministers have in front of them. And one of the challenges, for instance, is how to develop your country. And I would like to start today's discussion with a few words on what the future may and should hold for energy in Africa. But first, we should take a wider view and rather than look to the future, look to today. Because while we often speak about the global energy system being in transition, this is a misnomer. A transition suggests that there is some end result or some finality. But until the day that every citizen of the world has affordable access to clean, sustainable energy, this transition continues. And it's rather better to say that the energy system is evolving, reacting, changing, growing, all of these things and more. As mentioned before, take a look at today's oil prices, for example. Who here in this room could have confidently suggested 1 year ago that we will be looking at $50 or maybe even less a barrel? And that is what we're facing today, and that is what our energy systems must deal with. And yet we all know these prices will not last forever. And so for Africa, as with all regions of the world, these oil prices represent both a challenge and an opportunity. It's of course a challenge for exporting nations who rely on profits and a potential boon for importing nations whose economies can benefit from lower energy bills. But you know, it's too simple. It's also a chance to reduce or remove fossil fuel subsidies that currently eat up such a large part of government budget. It's a chance to invest in a diversified energy system that can better withstand price shocks in the future. It's a chance to make meaningful progress on climate issues. And the low oil price, just one example. Taking advantage of such opportunities, seizing this and other chances, that is what the countries of Africa must do if the 21st century is to be the African century. And we all know there's a great deal of work to be done. And with the invaluable assistance of many African governments, institutions, and experts, the IEA this past year, published an African energy outlook focused on sub-Saharan Africa. And the central theme of this report is the apparent contradiction between a region that is very rich in energy resources, but in many countries still poor, very poor in terms of energy supply. And as today, more than 620 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, that's about 2/3 of the population, live without electricity. And in addition, nearly 730 million rely on hazardous, inefficient forms of cooking, resulting in a huge number of premature deaths. Large numbers, representing great challenges. But these challenges are surmountable. Not only that, but the benefits of success are immense. Meeting the energy needs and aspirations of sub-Saharan African citizens can turbocharge economic growth. Reliable power supply can transform the welfare of households and remove the shadow of uncertainty that holds back the growth of many promising businesses. And renewable energy sources, they are pivotal to the prospects for African energy. In our outlook, they account for almost half of the growth in power generation over the period to 2040, with hydropower playing a major role in bringing down the average cost of power to consumers, currently among the highest in the world. And renewable sources are also instrumental in helping all these millions of people gain access to electricity, particularly in rural areas where the costs of connection to the centralized grids are high. So, how this to become a reality? What is needed for the sub-Saharan energy sector to be the engine for inclusive economic and social development? Now, one critical element is continuing to improve the conditions necessary for investments. Predictable, reliable, and stable procedures and frameworks combined with appropriate incentives can give investors the confidence that is required to commit capital to Africa's energy sector. We estimate that since 2000, 2 out of every $3 put into the sub-Saharan energy sector has been committed to the development of resources for export, rather than to meet directly the needs of African-owned consumers. And this, of course, has to change. It's governments. Governments can rebalance this equation and bring more money into the sector if they make a concerted effort to reduce the risk facing investors on their domestic markets. And another critical element, in our view, is regional cooperation. And although there are some major cross-border energy initiatives already in place, technical and political barriers continue to limit trade and hold back investment, particularly in large projects that require regional scale. So a clean, smart, and well-functioning energy sector is not an impossible goal. And we have been encouraged by the progress made by many, many governments in the region, including those presented here today. But the journey is by no means over. And I think it's important to realize that this journey takes us all to join into. Well, as I mentioned, we have a distinguished panel, a very distinguished panel, and I would like to turn to them to hear about their visions and about their visions about the next steps. And I would like to start, and now I'm going to look into my list because, well, here it is. I would like to start with Minister of Natural Resources, Energy and Mining from Malawi, the Honorable Mr. Atupele Austin Muluzi. And he has been a member of Parliament since 2004. He's the president of the Liberal Opposition Party in the United Democratic Front. He was its presidential candidate during the 2014 election, and he is the only opposition member to serve in the Mutharika administration. And in June 2014, Mr. Muluzi was appointed by the new president, Peter Mutharika, as Minister of Natural Resources, Energy and Mining. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me recognize Dr. Abdul Balul and distinguished participants. Malawi recognizes the energy sector as both a key driver and enabler for growth. We are focused on growing our economy and diversifying the economy from a largely predominantly importing country to an exporting economy. Our focus is on ensuring that we have sustainable growth of at least 6.5% consistently. And in order to do so, we're very much aligning ourselves and ensuring that we grow our economy, but also develop the energy sector, which is a catalyst for economic transformation. The current generation capacity in Malawi is around 351 megawatts. This is very, very low. We need to double that within the next 4 to 5 years. The access rate is around 9%, which is also perhaps one of the lowest access rates in the world. If we can achieve at least 30% within the next 15 years, Malawi begins to transition into a middle-income country. But in order to do so, it requires a new type of leadership. Malawi has a history of setting policy, very good policy, with very limited follow-through on tangible implementation, delivery, and results. The government of President Peter Mutharika is extremely focused on creating this anomaly and has put in place tangible instruments and actions that will implement this energy reform process. We're going through trying times at the moment. I'm sure most of you are aware of the environmental challenges, and the cyclone situation in Malawi has affected our generation capacity. We have lost around 40% of generation from hydro. So diversification from hydro to other sources of energy is absolutely critical. I'll just flag up a number of reforms that are currently going on at the moment. We're improving the ease of doing business in Malawi, including exploring beneficial approaches to public-private partnerships, especially in the energy sector. We are currently upgrading our transmission and distribution systems to reduce energy losses and also to improve both energy efficiency and transmission interconnections to diversify supply sources. We're also increasing the efficiency and the capacity of electricity generation, which, as I said earlier, stands around 351 megawatts, and we intend to double that within the next 4 to 5 years by constructing new power plants. The establishment of 3 critical fuel reserves in major cities of the country is currently underway, with a capacity of around 60 million liters of fuel to sustain us over 3 months of reserves per investment compared to the current 15 days cover, which is prevailing at the moment. We're also carrying out wider institutional reforms within the sector to improve implementation and monitoring capabilities. We are reforming our power tariffs and addressing inefficiencies, such as ensuring 100% collection of bill payments and better recovery of costs, maintenance, distribution losses, and capital budget execution. We're also in the process of promoting renewable energy systems and increasing the energy mix. However, all these reforms that I've mentioned are very much implementable, provided that we concentrate and focus on ensuring that leadership and good governance in pursuing these reforms is prioritized. Technical fixes are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And that is why in Malawi we are growing a new generation of leaders to ensure that we drive the transformation agenda, right from the president throughout, and it permeates through the government systems. Some of the key elements of good leadership and governance include A, deepening transparency and accountability within the energy sector. B, the role of political leadership in this process, especially in championing the tough competing reforms that are necessary to take place. And finally, demonstrating tangible results, especially to ordinary citizens and our key stakeholders, including the private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Muluzi, for this overview. And I think there's something else that you are, well, it's very important, not only for Malawi, but also for a number of other countries. That's the issue of the resilience of energy infrastructure. And although at this moment you have a lot of water, too much, with all the problems that go with it, and it will have its influence on energy resilience as well. Maybe you could shed your light on that issue when we are in the panel discussion. And I think another issue that is very important, which you highlighted, it's about planning and about long-term policy. So don't think about these low oil prices. They will come up, as they have always gone up and down. This volatility has always been there. But long-term policy planning, it's very important. So now let's listen to Ms. Maimouna Ndoye-Seck. She's the Minister of Energy and Renewable Energy Development of Senegal. She started in September 2013, and she also worked at the State Electricity Corporation Senelec from 1988 to 2001 before joining the electricity regulator CRSE as an economist, and she rose to become president of the CRSE in May 2012. And now she is the Minister of Energy and Renewable Energy Development in Senegal. Minister, the floor is yours.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente de séance. Je me réjouis, en tant que ministre de l'Énergie et du Développement des énergies renouvelables du Sénégal, de prendre part à ce panel dont le thème « Transformer les défis infrastructurels en opportunités économiques » représente pour l'Afrique subsaharienne en général, le Sénégal en particulier, un important point de discussion. Le Sénégal est un pays situé à l'extrême ouest de l'Afrique, avec une population d'environ 13 millions. Mais un pays qui s'intègre dans un espace économique de 300 millions d'habitants. Espace économique qui est le comité économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la CEDEAO. C'est un pays également qui est caractérisé par un taux d'accès à l'énergie relativement faible. Une bonne partie de la consommation en énergie représente la biomasse, c'est-à-dire le bois de chauffe, qui est utilisé à plus de 50% dans le bilan énergétique du Sénégal. Au niveau de l'électricité également, le taux d'accès est d'environ 50%, avec un taux très bas dans les zones rurales, qui se situent aujourd'hui aux alentours de 28%. Donc le grand défi du Sénégal en termes de transition énergétique est le défi de l'accessibilité de l'énergie. Accessibilité en termes de disponibilité, mais aussi accessibilité en termes de coût. Puisque jusqu'à présent, nous avons un système électrique qui est essentiellement basé sur les produits pétroliers. 90% de notre production provient du pétrole. Seuls 10% provient aujourd'hui des énergies renouvelables et particulièrement de l'hydroélectricité. Et c'est pour cela que dans le cadre du plan qui vient d'être développé au Sénégal et qui est dénommé Plan Sénégal émergent, la place de l'énergie est très importante. Et nous avons un mix énergétique que nous voulons développer pour non seulement rendre accessible l'énergie au niveau de toutes les populations, mais aussi baisser sensiblement le coût de production de l'énergie qui est à la base du développement. Ce mix énergétique vise à atteindre une part de 20% d'énergie renouvelable, hors hydroélectricité, alors qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes à presque moins de 5% d'énergie renouvelable, solaire et éolienne. Ce qui est un paradoxe puisque le Sénégal dispose de beaucoup d'atouts en termes d'énergie solaire, avec un ensoleillement de 1850 watts par mètre carré sur 3000 heures dans l'année, et un potentiel éolien également très important. Ce mix énergétique vise également d'autres technologies comme le charbon et l'hydroélectricité pour baisser davantage les coûts de production qui, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, constituent un des défis à relever pour le Sénégal. Les possibilités d'investissement au Sénégal sont énormes, nous allons y revenir plus tard, mais ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que le Sénégal est un pays caractérisé par une grande démocratie, avec une stabilité politique qui est bien connue, puisque le Sénégal constitue un des rares pays de l'Afrique subsaharienne à ne pas connaître de coup d'État. Donc les transitions politiques se sont opérées à la suite d'élections. Donc ça, c'est un atout majeur. Les droits des investisseurs sont également protégés au niveau du Sénégal. L'autre élément très important de la transition énergétique au Sénégal et dans l'Afrique subsaharienne constitue le développement du marché. Puisque, comme je l'ai dit, nous avons une population d'environ 13 à 14 millions d'habitants, donc un marché relativement faible. Et le développement des espaces économiques que nous avons, avec le développement des réseaux de transport, va offrir aux investisseurs et à nos pays les possibilités de développer de grands projets qui vont contribuer à baisser les coûts avec les économies d'échelle. Et dans ce cadre-là, plusieurs espaces existent. L'Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Sénégal, qui regroupe le Sénégal, la Guinée, le Mali et la Mauritanie. L'Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Gambie, qui regroupe le Sénégal, la Guinée-Bissau et la Gambie. Et le West African Power Pool, qui est en train d'être mis en place. Donc tout cela nous offre l'opportunité de développer nos infrastructures sur le plan électrique et de façon plus générale sur le plan énergétique, et nous conduira à un développement certain de notre espace économique. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Minister Sek, and I think it's important to realize the differences between the countries, and you emphasize that. I think it's important to realize as well that access to energy is also depending on lower costs and on enough supply, sufficient supply. The diversification is important, but you added something else. It's the market development. And I think this is something that we have to take into account as well. It's not only about supply, but it's about stability. That's very important, and it's about investment and about market development. Now let's listen to Minister Simon Dujanga, the Uganda Minister of State for Energy, and he is in that position since June 2006. He graduated in electrical engineering. And in 2001, he entered the parliament for the National Resistance Movement. He was re-elected in 2006. And since the 1st of June 2006, he is State Minister for Energy in Uganda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As has been observed at the opening of this panel, our region has been characterized by inadequate physical infrastructure. Economic activities, efficiency, and competitiveness have been hampered by the inadequate energy and power infrastructure, lack of roads, railways, ICT, among others. In order for this region to continue being one of the world's fast-growing economic zone, provision of adequate infrastructure has been identified by our government as priority. Funding has been a problem. Funding of these projects still remains a challenge. We have tried as governments in the region to fund some of these projects from our annual budgets, but the annual budgets themselves have got restrictions. And furthermore, local banks are often not able to supply the tenor of loans needed for the long-term infrastructure investment, and therefore the opportunities for investors. The inadequate infrastructure may be the biggest threat to our region's long-term growth, and at the same time, it is also represent a significant opportunity for investors to finance physical infrastructure assets, such as ports, railway lines, toll roads, power stations, power lines, hospitals, and broadband ICT. With governments across the continent committing themselves to these projects, the development of this region is just beginning, and there may be 20 to 30 more years of infrastructure development boom. And for example, in the East African region, Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda, we have come together and we have formulated what we call the Northern Corridor in the East African region. And we are doing projects together, and these include power generation, transmission line, and distribution. Then these projects, the three governments have set clear implementation timelines that have market guarantees of long-term policy stability and revenue certainty. We have created enough institutional capacity to make the projects happen. And it should be noted that this region is politically stable with improved governance and transparency. And we have encouraged regional cooperation, regional integration. We are also turning to PPPs, public-private partnerships, to deliver efficient and cost-effective infrastructure and services. The public-private partnerships has helped public sector entities shorten delivery times, sharing risk, achieve better value for their money, and increase innovation in the infrastructure rollout and provision of services. Now, with these PPPs, organizations have gained from the skills and experience of the private sector. And in order to facilitate this private-public partnership, we have, in Uganda, passed a bill known as the PPP law. And this PPP law will govern the relationship between governments and the private sector, because private sector will want predictability and assurance that the money, they can recoup their interests. So this will cut down costs for co-investing in government. So the private sector will be encouraged to invest with government, and this will cut down their cost of investment. Now, other interventions we have done in Uganda is we had the electricity law of 1964. We have repealed that and changed it to suit modern operations, that is delivering projects through private sector. With this law, we have an independent regulator who will determine the tariffs, independent of government. And then we have, for small projects, put in feed-in tariff, or that is a standard power purchase agreement in which there is a standard tariff for a type of, for every type of technology. This shortens the time we take normally for negotiating power purchase agreement. I've already said that we have the PPP law in place. And because we are going to have all kinds of interests in the sector, we have formulated the National Environment Management Authority, also independent of government, in order to monitor what we are doing environmentally in the country. And then, as government, we put in place, because we are only 15% electrified, so we put in place funds, special funds for rural electrification programs, where there is also opportunity. We want to move from 15% electrification in the next 10 years to over 50% electrification. And then we get money, we put a fund in which we sink some money every year. We also we levy on the current consumers some tariff levy in order to raise money. Now, we are emphasizing regional cooperation because it is cheaper to do projects together as 3 countries in a region. The cost of consultancy is 1, and when we go to the financial institution, it is quicker. They look at us more quickly. And then we share data and technology when we come as one country. Now, there's, of course, the political will. The political will. As I said, we have the Northern Corridor. We meet every 2 months with the leaders of those 3 countries. And then the ministers and the permanent secretaries are put to task to explain why something has not happened. So this is, we always look forward to the next meeting and see that your answers are acceptable. So this has pushed the projects. So it's not the old time of having slow projects not moving. But this is maybe our experience. That before we move, we came together as 3 countries, then we have different policy levels, different development of different regulators, different policy regulators at different levels and so on. But now when we are together as 3 countries, then we harmonize this. Everybody is moving at the same speed. So this is an experience other regions can copy from. Then the summits, as I said, every 2 months we have the heads of state meeting with us to explain why some projects are not moving. And then when we need funding, it is a lot easier when we go as a region to the financing institution than when you go as one country. So for now, I would like to stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And you added again a couple of new elements to the picture that we are looking at. It's about infrastructure in remote places and infrastructure to connect to the grid. And the funding, of course, the money. I'll come back to that later when we have our questioning round. Technology transfer, political will, and regional cooperation. So I think the picture is getting more and more clear. Thank you very much for your intervention. And that brings me to our 4th panelist, Dr. Godnos Bolade Igali. He's Minister of State for Power of Nigeria. He is a seasoned diplomat, technocrat, administrator with over 32 years working experience in the public service. He has served in different parts of the world as a diplomat, where he exhibited exemplary commitment, creativity, and selflessness in achieving targeted goals in the Nigeria foreign policy. And he was appointed as Federal Permanent Secretary to the Federal Ministry of Water Resources in May 2010, and Ambassador Igali was redeployed to Federal Ministry of Power in March 2030. So, Minister Igali, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The advantage of speaking last is that you can leverage on what everybody has said. But first, let me appreciate the organizers of this forum for giving us from Africa the opportunity to share and discuss such critical issues as turning the opportunities, challenges in terms of infrastructure to opportunities. The advantage which we in Africa have over many other continents is that the infrastructure which we need is not there. In other places, the infrastructure is there and you only try to improve on it. In our case, for 600 billion people on our continent, most of the infrastructure is not there. So it is completely almost a green field in terms of the opportunities. The other second advantage is the fact that increasingly, of that 6 million people, we see that more than half of that population are people under 30 years. We have a vibrant youth population, perhaps much more than every other continent in the world. And because of the spread of education, these are educated young people that need infrastructure in the new millennium and to be able to live meaningful lives. Therefore, there is a voracious appetite. There is an appetite that is robust for infrastructure. And that places a great burden on those of us who are the political leaders of the continent to create the right environment to develop this, the infrastructural base, which does not exist for this young population in our countries that is mostly young people that are under 30 years. My colleagues here, the ministers, have already spoken on the fact that the way forward, first and foremost, was for us to develop policies. First, we develop policies at the continental level. The African Union has taken it as its burden and created a whole directorate for infrastructure, a directorate that will ensure that there are straddling situations in different countries that make it possible for infrastructure to be developed, be it transportation, ICT, water resources, and particularly for most of us on this panel, for energy and electric power. So, both at the continental level and at the sub-regional level, we are developing policies to ensure that the right environment exists for infrastructure to be developed. And that brings me to the last point that the Honorable Minister from Uganda spoke about. We realize that no matter what government does, government cannot, depending on line budget, be able to provide all this infrastructure. Therefore, at national level, we must create the opportunities, we must create the right environment, enabling environment to allow investment to come in to participate in infrastructural development. Therefore, we almost, without exception, at the continental level, at the sub-regional level, at the national level, our governments continue to improve on the laws that enable us to allow capital to participate in development of infrastructure in almost every country. And that is why we are seeing mega projects take part, come up all over Africa, and we're happy that a lot of our international friends are now becoming partners with us. The other thing is making sure that these laws work. I give you the example of Nigeria, our power sector. For over 100 years, government-dominated power sector, power was not available. There was a bloated workforce, inefficiencies, technical losses very high, commercial losses very high. And in 2005, we now created a law which break the monopoly of government and allowed private sector to come in. On 1st of November 2013, we completely handed over all power generation and distribution to private sector. Completely. We're out of it. And we've seen that private investors came, both from national private sector and our international partners, and bought these assets. So even the new mega projects that we are building, as we finish building, we hand it over to private sector. Government cannot be in this business because it is not working. And we're allowing the private sector to come in. The other point that I think needs to be emphasized is the existence of a very dynamic, innovative, and creative domestic private sector. I can speak for Nigeria. We are the biggest economy on the continent. And when we privatize our power sector, the total money that came in was about $4 billion for the first set of privatization, and the second set, about $6 billion. And we realized that a lot of the money came from inside Nigerian private sector working together with foreign partners. So there is a local capacity to work together with international friends. And we realized something quite interesting, that when we privatized our power sector in Nigeria, there was a lot of interest from other African countries. The power company of the federal capital, Abuja, was bought by a Zambian company from Zambia, and another one was bought from a company from South Africa. So within Africa itself, there's movement of private sector. And I think Africa has come of age when our private sector can partner with private sector from any other part of the world. So today we have a lot of big projects all over the continent that are waiting for partners to come from outside Africa. And we, on our part, are improving on our domestic base, both from the part of the public sector and our private sector, to work with you to be able to ensure that we develop the infrastructure. Power remains critical. Power remains critical because without power, we cannot go forward. And I think almost all the countries are undertaking reforms in the power sector. I think I'll leave it at this stage, and we continue the conversation as we take some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's energy, electricity is the engine to power economic growth, to power education, to power social development, etc. And of course, money is needed to engine that growth, to engine the infrastructure that's needed. Now, before turning to the audience, I would like to ask you one question. You all talked about funding and about public-private partnerships, partners to come into your countries as partners. Do you see potential for an increased cooperation between sub-Saharan Africa and energy-rich nations, such as the regions in the Middle East and North African region? Who would like to start answering that question? And then I turn to the floor. Yes, please.
Yes, indeed. And as we speak now, for example, for the Eastern African region, we are getting interconnection all the way from Cairo through Sudan, Ethiopia, and the East African region. Now, if you look at our neighbors in the north, like Egypt, they've developed their system quite a bit more than us. And we have to learn from them through the power pool, the East African power pool. So there's definitely going to be cooperation within the continent with our neighbors north of Sahara. We are also looking beyond that, as my colleague from Nigeria said, when they floated their power system, people came, you said, from Zambia?
Yeah.
From Zambia. And also we have in Uganda, ESCOM of South Africa, they're in there. And therefore, when these companies come up, even countries beyond Africa are welcome to join, help us grow. Thank you.
Minister Seck, what do you think is possible for Senegal to develop mechanisms for regional cooperation and funding from neighbors?
Je vous remercie. En ce qui concerne le financement des infrastructures énergétiques au Sénégal, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de potentialités. Si je commence par la question de l'électricité, le Sénégal a décidé de faire réaliser tous ces nouveaux projets de production d'électricité par des privés, dans le cadre du partenariat public-privé. Nous avons déjà plusieurs producteurs indépendants privés qui ont des contrats IPP et qui nous vendent de l'électricité. Et dans le cadre sous-régional également, nous avons développé le partenariat public-privé. Au niveau également des hydrocarbures, le potentiel d'investissement est extrêmement important puisque nous voyons en regardant la documentation que 30% des découvertes de gaz et de pétrole sur les 5 dernières années se sont produites au niveau de l'Afrique subsaharienne. Et le Sénégal vient d'avoir une première découverte de pétrole il y a quelques mois. Donc il y a un potentiel d'investissement privé très important au niveau du secteur du pétrole et du gaz, mais surtout au niveau du secteur de l'électricité, et particulièrement sur les énergies renouvelables, qui constituent l'énergie du futur, mais que nous ne pouvons pas développer de façon efficiente dans le cadre seulement d'un seul pays. Et c'est là où je parlais dans mon introduction du développement du marché, qui permet aux différents pays de pouvoir se secourir et d'échanger l'électricité, car avec les énergies renouvelables, nous sommes confrontés à l'intermittence de la source d'énergie qui nécessite qu'au moment où la source renouvelable n'est pas disponible, qu'on puisse être secouru par un pays voisin. Donc le potentiel d'investissement au niveau de nos organismes comme l'OMVS et l'OMVG et le West African Power Pool sont énormes, mais au niveau du Sénégal également, nous avons un cadre réglementaire qui est déjà défini pour permettre d'attirer les investisseurs privés, mais aussi une autorité de régulation, qui est un élément très important pour le développement de l'investissement privé. Mais au-delà du Sénégal, nous avons un régulateur au niveau de la CEDEAO, l'AREC, qui doit réglementer les échanges d'énergie au niveau de la CEDEAO. Merci.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I saw the hand of Minister Igali.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to add to what the Ugandan minister said by explaining that there's a high level of cooperation between us, some of the bigger, what we may call some of the bigger economies in the region, and our neighbors in terms of cooperation. But I see that it is not only, for example, some of the bigger economies taking money to other countries. Like the example I gave, when we privatized in Nigeria, we saw that there were interest from all over Africa because different business actors from other African economies. That's a country like Zambia. Zambian private sector people invested in Nigeria as a good example, and they own the electricity distribution company of Abuja, working together with others. And also, recently, we've had a lot of interest from some Senegalese investors. And then there are also Nigerian investors who are investing heavily in infrastructure in almost most of the countries in Africa. So there's a high level of collaboration. And I think that creates a good platform for partnership with a non-African private sector. Because the African private sector itself sees the challenge, that they have to take the challenge by going out of their countries to other African countries as a way to show the confidence that we have in ourselves to enable attract investors from other parts of the world.
Thank you. Minister Muluzi, I'm sure you would like to add something.
Yeah, I just thought I'd just briefly say that we too also recognize the importance of the private sector as an engine for growth, particularly the role that public-private partnerships could play in developing the energy sector, not just in Malawi, but also within the region of Southern Africa. We're also in the process of interconnecting with Zambia and Mozambique. Within the next 2 years, we will be able to have the interconnection, which also allows us to be part of the Southern African power pool. This is extremely important because obviously it is an opportunity for the private sector to come in and invest.
Thank you very much. Now, we have a very international audience here in this room. So I would like to turn to our audience and ask them whether they have comments or questions or suggestions to the panel. Yes, please. I see 2 hands over there. The microphone will be coming to you. Yes. And please could you say who you are and why you're here and whom you would like to address your question to.
Sure. This is Lasa Chani from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Department of Climate Change and Energy. I'm part of the Young Leader Future Energy program. And I have a question for Her Excellency, Minister of Senegal. How much is non-hydro installed capacity of renewables you have installed in Senegal, first of all? Second, what type of renewables there are? And the third question is there any renewable targets for Senegal? Thank you.
Renewables is the topic, non-hydro renewables and the target. Minister Sek.
Merci beaucoup. Ce que je voulais dire, c'est que si on intègre l'hydroélectricité dans les énergies renouvelables, nous pouvons dire que nous avons une capacité que nous consommons dans le cadre de la coopération sous-régionale d'environ 60 MW sur une capacité installée qui dépasse 600 MW de capacité installée. C'est vrai que c'est très faible par rapport à certaines échelles, mais nous avons encore un niveau de demande qui est relativement faible. Mais en dehors de cette capacité hydroélectrique, nous n'avons pas encore de capacité solaire et éolienne d'envergure installée au Sénégal. Nous sommes à moins de 1 MW de capacité solaire installée au Sénégal. Mais nous avons des projets, puisque nous envisageons, nous avons même signé des contrats de production indépendante d'électricité à partir du solaire de 150 MW à installer d'ici 2017. Et dans ce cadre, je peux citer une centrale de 15 MW qui va être installée durant l'année 2015, qui est un don des Émirats arabes unis, que les Émirats arabes unis ont offert au Sénégal, que nous allons installer par l'intermédiaire de la société Masdar. Nous avons aussi 15 MW que nous allons installer également cette année de la coopération allemande. Et nous allons lancer un appel d'offres d'ici la fin du mois de janvier pour 50 MW solaires supplémentaires. Et nous avons une centrale de 150 MW éolienne qui a fait l'objet de signature de contrat, mais les 50 MW seront installés d'ici 2017. Donc notre objectif, c'est de passer de presque 0 MW à 150 MW dans 2 ans. Le coût il est encore relativement important puisque nous sommes aux alentours de 12 cents, les contrats qui ont été signés, 12 cents sans stockage. Ce qui fait que l'un dans l'autre, ça peut être plus important que les autres projets que nous avons. Je vous remercie.
Very impressive numbers and targets. I saw another hand over there, and then here in the first row. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Richard Turner. I'm a representative for SolarAid in Sunny Money, which is a solar light distributor in sub-Saharan Africa. And as this is the year of the International Year of Light, I'd like to ask the panel what they're doing about helping market growth for solar lighting to help communities in off-grid locations that use kerosene or candles for light. And surely this is critical to provide energy access for all. We know markets for solar lights have grown dramatically in Kenya and Tanzania thanks to 0% VAT tariffs. And they're having a profound impact on the lives of families. Can they say what their governments are doing to promote off-grid solutions and whether there's anything more?
And your question is to all the panel or to one panelist in particular?
Any of the panel. SolarAid Sunny Money operates currently in Malawi. We've just started in Uganda, and we have ambitions to spread our operations.
Well, then let's start with Minister Muluzi and then Minister Dujanga.
Thank you very much for that question. Very important question. As I mentioned earlier, Malawi has an access rate of around 9%. It's extremely low. The rural community is around 80% of our population is located in rural setting, and access in the rural areas is 2%. So this is extremely low. And for us to actually grow the economy, we really have to double our efforts in ensuring that we have access to power, especially for rural communities. And we have put together deliberate efforts as government to make sure that we have an enabling environment in place that would strengthen the partnerships between the private sector, like yourselves, that want to come to Malawi and provide off-grid solutions. We are also in the process to ensure that we diversify our energy mix, which is also absolutely critical. There's a huge dependency on wood fuel, and if we can move away from that, of course, you're very much aware of the effects of the climate change and deforestation. So we actually would like to see strengthened partnerships and see how we can improve with government and how we can actually facilitate greater access through off-grid solutions like the one you've proposed.
Thank you. Minister Dujanga.
Well, thank you very much for that question. In Uganda, we give incentives to the solar companies, those providing electricity from solar for off-grid solution, usually tax incentives on the panels and other components of the system. What we do not want to do is to encourage subsidy, because subsidy is unsustainable and it distorts the economics of the projects. But what we have done of recent, we have one or two already operating in my country. We encourage them to come together with a telephone company. You know, our country is fairly rural, and as I said, we are 15% electrified. Therefore, this telephone company will want to have a mast somewhere in the countryside. So what we say is that the telephone company, instead of running diesel generators to power their masts, they will come together with people like you and put a facility there. And then the village, which has been going 20 kilometers to charge their phones, are very excited, and they become stakeholders in your project. So your installations are safe, they cannot be vandalized because the villagers look at your installation as their own. you don't even need to hire a guard because they will guard these installations themselves. So we interface, and our regulator is encouraged to find all means which are economically possible to have this tariff to the villagers somehow friendly. So we have a mechanism in place to carry out that part of the projects.
Very, very promising examples and very promising projects. Now, there was a question over here in the front row, and I'm sorry, we are running out of time a bit. No, not yet, but it's always like this. So I think this will be the last question. I'm sorry.
Yes, good morning. My name is Khalid Benamou, the Managing Director of the Sahrawi project, which involves 5 gigawatt gradual deployment for serving regional markets out of Morocco. And my question is to His Excellency Minister Igali regarding actually the energy access situation in Nigeria. As you know, prior to considering any export possibilities, the government of Morocco had to ensure that 98% of its population would have access to electricity. So considering actually the security dimension of lack of access to electricity in your country, and you, as you are the African continent's largest energy exporter, what can your government can do to speed up actually the access to electricity?
Thank you very much. Like I said earlier, the most important thing is to create the right environment for the private sector to come in. Government, no matter how much resources are available, cannot do it alone. So we must create a right environment. Let me give you an example with telecommunications in Nigeria. We had, in 1999, we had about 1 million fixed lines. 1 million, for a population then that was about 80 million, 90 million people. Today, after we liberalize our telecommunication, we have 110 million lines. It's exponential when we open it up to private sector. And we realize that we just have to open up the electricity sector. It was in government, it never worked. So the first thing is to make the laws to open it up. The second thing is to create the necessary incentives. For example, in Nigeria, if you are bringing in anything for the power sector, it is duty-free. We're not going to give subsidies, but it's duty-free at the beginning. When you bring in the equipment to build the power plants, they build the solar systems, and so on. The third one is to build institutions. We realize that we have to build a robust regulator, free from government, a regulator that can be able to create a willing buyer, willing seller market. We have to create an off-taker, a bulk trader that can give you a power purchase agreement ahead of time. And finally, we saw we couldn't do it alone. So the projects that are regional in nature, we have to partner with other countries, especially those around us. So we realize that there must be a high level of political will. People must see the commitment. That is what is being done, and it is already beginning to create impact, both in Nigeria and in the rest of Africa.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm not going to give any concluding remarks, but I would like to ask our panelists, what is your priority number one? And if you can say it in one word, that would be marvelous, but not longer than one sentence. What is your priority number one? Minister Sek.
Notre priorité numéro 1, c'est l'accès à l'électricité en termes de disponibilité et en termes de coût.
Thank you very much.
Je veux juste vous dire que pour cela, nous voulons, dans les zones rurales, où le taux d'accès est aujourd'hui à 28%, porter cela à 60% dans 2 ans, avec le développement des énergies renouvelables dans les zones reculées.
Thank you.
Merci.
Minister Muluzi.
We're very clear on our key priority growth sectors, which includes energy and our natural resources. We're providing an enabling environment to ensure that we enact legislation in order for us to have an IPP framework that is attractive for indirect investment, but also at the same time to ensure that there is greater transparency and accountability in the energy sector.
Thank you. Minister Dujanga.
By regional cooperation, we are creating bigger markets. And the message from this region, Sub-Saharan Africa, is that we are ready to move, and you are invited to come and we move together. Thank you.
And Minister Igali.
Energy is the foundation for the future of Africa. Therefore, we take it as a duty to continue to improve on the environment in which people can invest in energy and be able to have a good return on the investment.
Thank you very much. And dear audience, I would like you to join me in a big round of applause for our panel.